We wish to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the lands on which our home stands. We respectfully recognise elders both past and present. Welcome to Season 9 of The Leak. Tonight on The Leak.
We Eat Cake talk about Tom Hanks and how life has changed since COVID-19 border closures were introduced.
Our good mates Ethan and Sweeney drop by for a long overdue catch-up.
RMIT sociologist Dr. Alexander Waters also pays us a visit to discuss serious economic business.
Oh, hang on. I thought we were exploring issues currently facing universities and international students, like workforce Uberization and the rise of scollypops.
Yes, that's serious tea too, and we generally talk about life in the community in a post-COVID world.
What does a post-COVID world look like? Do we live in a post-COVID world? Have we got any posts? I forgot to check.
I did, and we do. It's bills, it's always bills. We're a year into a plague, and the only people who kept in touch with me are the utility companies.
Welcome to The Leak.
Wear those anymore.
You do on public transport.
Do you?
Do I? I wear it to hide my resting bitch face anyway. What a year, hey?
We're more than halfway.
Fuck.
No negativity around Judy. We're trying to make this a positive environment. Plants need positivity to live. Remember Glenn?
Glenn was drama queen.
May he rest. So keeping it upbeat. Judy's happy because we spent so much time with her in the last few months, and Judy, bless her, is also happy that the rest of the environment got a break in 2020 from so much pollution. On you, dudes?
Yeah, but to be fair, everyone's doing road trips now, going in the boat down to Tasmania.
That's true, but people are seeing Australia to support locals, and they're seeing people that they haven't seen in over a year.
A year of being isolated.
Households really got time to bond though.
What about the people who don't like who they live with? Oh. No more crying juice for you.
Fine. Whatever, I don't care anyway. Why don't you FaceTime someone you do like? Thanks to 2020, the year it became completely acceptable to keep in touch with via tech only.
You know, I don't know if I ever turned on my camera. It's actually better. I can roll my eyes freely.
There you go. There's something about 2020 you liked. And you like being clean. Everyone's hygiene has gotten better. We're all carrying hand sanitizer now.
See, to me, that's sad. Whiskey makers had to resort to making hand sanitizer. What happened to the whiskey, huh? Did they throw it out? Was it put inside the hand sanitizer? Licking your hands doesn't sound very hygienic to me.
Well, it sounds to me like they adapted well during such unprecedented times. No, seriously, you have to admit, it's pretty amazing how many workplaces got their shit sorted for their staff, adapted or offered work from home.
What about the people who lost their jobs?
Point Lakshmi. The government offered incentives for upskilling, education, and let's not forget that glorious JobKeeper payment.
Point Marie. And the mental health rebate? 20 free counselling sessions.
Point Lakshmi.
But what about the people who've upskilled or graduated recently and can't find a job because the candidate pool is so fucking flooded? And supplement payments didn't do shit for a lot of people. Students, international students, students who are international.
Okay, yes, there is bad that balances out the good. But tell me, what is bad in this? We got to stay home in our PJs getting food and alcohol delivered without judgment. An introvert's dream.
Anxiety! We all got anxiety from 2020, although I did set a personal best for the number of mental breakdowns in a calendar year. I guess one positive is that we'll listen to epidemiologists from now on.
Oh, thank you. Why was that so hard for some people? And hey, we did listen for the most part.
Are we truly post-COVID?
We better check before Ethan and Sweeney get here. We'll be back.
It's the boys!
Hey!
Hello!
Pull up a chair.
How are we
Good
doing?
to be here.
Good
Hello.
to be here.
So, neighbours, how have you been going since the pandemic started?
Well, Marie, like you, Ethan and I work in the arts. And if there's one thing us arts workers know, aside from plant-based alternative milks, it's managing personal finances.
Something I avoid.
Exactly. So we saw a lot of our friends were reaching out to their employers to get on the JobKeeper payroll.
We thought that was a great idea. So we reached out to our employers to also get on the JobKeeper payroll.
Of course, the problem is, as a comedy duo, we write together, we perform together, and have an informal but free-flowing agreement to occasionally pay for each other's coffees.
In short, our bosses were each other.
So it was very distressing for me when I learnt that my boss, Sweeney Preston, had signed himself up for the JobKeeper payroll, but had not signed me up for the JobKeeper payroll.
I was similarly distressed when I found out that my boss, Ethan Kavanagh, had signed himself up for the JobKeeper payment and not signed me up for the JobKeeper payment.
So we decided to do what any two business-savvy people would do, and we immediately took this case to the Fair Work Ombudsman.
I'm chasing up my boss, Ethan Kavanagh, for the amount of $13,729.82.
And as his boss, I would be more than happy to compensate him, but unfortunately I'm waiting for my own claim from my boss, Sweeney Preston, to settle for the amount of $13,729.82.
That sounds like you owe each other the same amount of money.
Why don't you just call it even?
I'll have to talk to my boss.
We'll be back with Sweeney and Ethan after their short treasury meeting.
$111 nights, 111 days. Or the Great Mortality.
Wasn't that used for the plague in the 1600s? But we are in scourge lurgy times.
Oh, ring a rosies, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down from the bubonic plague.
Yeah, fuck off over there. We've truly learnt a lot about each other.
This pandemic has really forced us to think about what our values are as an individual and as a community.
But most worryingly, it revealed exactly where Australia's priorities lie.
Absolutely, we need to deal with that. But I don't understand the priority to ban and fine certain citizens who just want to come home.
Whilst we open up a bubble with New Zealand or Singapore.
Priorities, right? The Australian arts industry is abandoned and devalued.
Casually, millionaires and sports stars are welcomed into the country while families remain separated.
Priorities. Universities are struggling and left out a JobKeeper.
Whilst 34 of the country's largest companies claim benefits despite earning more than they would have pre-pandemic.
And the government's ministers behaving unethically and everyday Australians calling them out.
Yeah, go the girls. Also, for international students, recent stats show 2020 meant only having one meal a day, uncertainty, anxiety, and abandonment.
Being an international student was already difficult. Now it feels impossible. Not having access to HECS loans or Australia's legal protections means they're forced to work ridiculous hours and are regularly exploited. And COVID-19 has made employers even more desperate to cut costs.
A big congratulations to everyone who survived online study this semester. International students are some of the most vulnerable but valuable members of the Australian academic community. The current situation, I don't think any student would willingly pay 3 times as much to study a course whilst not even being in the country.
And they're not the only vulnerable people without a support system. Like, did you know that First Nations people are 5 times more likely to live in overcrowded accommodation, making it near impossible to self-isolate?
On top of that, many members of the LGBTQI+ community were forced to move back into dangerous family environments so they'd have a home to stay in, which also meant for many moving back into the closet and higher rates of mental illness and suicide.
I guess it's easier to say we're all in this together instead of making sure that we're taking care of the ones that are dealing with extra levels of hardship. We need support for those friends who've had it hard done by COVID, from international students to Aussies stranded abroad to LGBTQI folk.
We really have to ask ourselves, are any of these groups less deserving of our help? as home is not always the safest place to be.
The excuse, well, everyone was struggling, doesn't cover for negligence.
Put that on my gravestone. 'Cause at the end of the day, the way we're taking care of our international student community is no longer a domestic conversation. It's in plain sight for the world to see. Last year, international students contributed over $40 billion to the Australian economy. Yet we're down to 80% of our expected annual applications. Clear message to the government.
But on the bright side,
There's a bright side.
yes, there is. Think about the amount of things that have been adapted during this pandemic.
That is a fair point. Many tasks have become significantly more accessible, and reaching out for support is actually being normalised. You can stay home when you're sick. You can work from home. You can get your groceries delivered to your door. Just remember to turn your phone off on your day off.
You're completely right. Ever since healthcare has been forced to go remote, access to medical services like abortion, birth control and hormone therapy has increased significantly. Before COVID, having these alternatives were considered too complicated.
And online platforms have accommodated industries that have been struck by social distancing limitations. Biggest example is OnlyFans, which made it possible for sex workers to maintain their income and in fact become more normalised rather than taboo. More accessible, and above all, it made sex work safer. And then celebrities started joining in, just like they did with Twitch and TikTok. Because we don't need more celebrities in our lives, do we? Except for Lizzo. Dear Lizzo, this is Marie. Please don't ever leave TikTok. You're a gem.
Remote work meant that families ended up spending a lot more time with each other, which can either be empowering or dangerous. But whilst jobs were lost across industries, JobKeeper did do a decent job of softening the blow, unless you're not a permanent resident, in which case the government disappoints.
Yeah, it's a shame they didn't bring it back this year. Like, I know this recent lockdown was only 3 weeks, but it's a bold assumption to be making that our society's most vulnerable members have 3 weeks of savings ready to go in their bank accounts.
Absolutely. We simply can't ignore that people who were already suffering are now suffering more. Rises in domestic violence, eating disorders, homelessness, addiction, online gambling. People lost multiple jobs, incomes, the nightmare of Centrelink, especially if you were unemployed. Households increased. People couldn't afford basic necessities and medical care. Our most vulnerable couldn't access caregiving.
The survival of the everyday was a remarkable effort, and it really shows how humans and communities are endlessly adaptable with care and hard work. Let's hope we all know how to wash our hands.
Actually, how about all of the things that never got cleaned properly until COVID struck? Like, for example, our oven. Thanks, Big M.
You're welcome. And just to think, only a few years ago, you couldn't attend a concert online.
Speaking of new internet appearances, churches and other community organisations transitioned smoothly to online services, which is also amazing for Sunday access.
Throughout every lockdown, we've had to get creative, get local, and work with each other to solve everyday problems. Nowadays, it's pretty normal for communities not to panic when disaster strikes, but to jump straight up and say, hey, how can I help?
If only the government were as adaptable as we were.
I think it's time to speak to an expert on this. Let's table this discussion with Dr. Alex. He knows more on this. You know, it's been a year since Australia's COVID-19 border closures, with the best of intent, caused an unforeseen cataclysmic situation within the Australian higher education sector.
150,000 international students are still overseas awaiting return. Australian unis have lost $1.8 billion in revenue and 17,300 jobs. To discuss this further tonight, we're joined by Dr. Alexander Waters from Skills Training and Industry Network at the Business School of RMIT. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Doctor, Australian unis receive donations, student fees and government financial support, and some even have hundreds of millions of rainy day emergency relief funds. So were the 17,300 job cuts avoidable?
Absolutely, these cuts were avoidable. There's a great deal of evidence to suggest, that they could have made different choices.
And already, just 1 in 3 staff at university before the pandemic were permanently employed. Alex, what does the Uberization of our unis, what effect does that have on the workforce?
The Uberization of work really refers to a long-term sort of pattern of casualisation where gig economy firms like Uber, who don't officially acknowledge they hire workers, they treat them as so-called private contractors or third-party contractors legally, in order to effectively avoid paying them any of those sort of obligations that workers are entitled to. So
is
yeah,
this
please.
Partly to do with the new social class that is emerged, Precariat? What is that?
And this is a social class which is effectively beneath what we traditionally call the working class. So people who are, maybe entitled to a job for life, working in heavy industry and these sorts of areas.
Speaking of the existing labour force, it's been termed as, quote, one of the most educated, multicultural and multilingual in the world. So what benefits would we gain by opening the borders?
I think reopening the borders is a really urgent priority for Australia and for Victoria. Think of all the industries that are dependent on immigration and international students and so on.
Yeah, international student enrolments decreased by 17% and commencements decreased by 31%. So that's impacting the Australian labour market as well.
Yeah, it's having a big impact on the labour market. So the hospitality sector and the agriculture sector would be the two big ones that I would say have been really severely and acutely impacted.
So yeah,
in
and
these categories.
if international students continue to face closed borders, there'd also be a lot of effects for unis as well, wouldn't there?
Yeah, so certainly. There'll be very severe consequences. So some projections are stating that it'll take until 2025 to 2028 for Victorian universities to recover to where they peaked in 2019. As we know, international student fees are double or triple what domestic students pay. And they pay those fees up front rather than years after graduating. So you can imagine the impact it's going to have on university budgets in the very short term. And some universities are going to be talking about fiscal consolidation and maybe shutting down some campuses, maybe looking at amalgamating universities.
And it's such a shame because, in all seriousness, international students are really genuinely suffering.
Yeah, financially by losing their jobs, having to pay for storage, double rent or breaking lease fees.
And psychologically communicating a sense of abandonment by the Australian community and other negative mental health impacts.
Some have tweeted disinterest in being fed sweeteners, aka Scully Pops, by Australian leadership.
And some have started petitions and called on assistance from the UN as well.
Alexander, where are we in terms of reopening borders and getting international students back onto campus?
So the federal government in their budget of this year pointed to mid-2022 in terms of a timeline for beginning to reopen the borders to international students and migrants. The Victorian state budget was slightly more optimistic, talking about the beginning of 2022. I think, realistically, it may take longer. It may take until 2023, 2024 until we have similar numbers of international students back in the country.
Well, Dr. Alexander Waters, thank you so much for your time. It was lovely chatting with you. Would you like a biscuit?
Thank you very much. I'll take one.
It's the boys again!
Hey!
We're back! Hello!
Hello again.
Hello. Welcome back from your meeting.
Where did we leave? 2020?
That's right. So at the beginning of 2020, we had a look at the world's arts industries and we saw utter devastation.
Indeed. We saw this graphic from Singapore where readers of the Sunday Times voted artist as the least essential job in the country.
And we saw this headline from back home in Australia, which said 3 in 4 Aussie artists were likely to lose their job due to the pandemic.
Sounds like relatable content. How'd you guys react to all this?
We did the only thing we could do, and we turned to the main pillars of support for professional freelance entertainers.
These are the people who've never let artists like us down in a time of need. We are, of course, talking about national governments.
We sifted through the flurry of messaging going around at the time and found what we believe to be the shiniest golden nuggets of advice on finding financial stability in a rapidly changing workforce.
We took this advice from the UK government, whose clear directive to us was that we should probably retrain.
And we took this advice from the American government that said we should probably upskill.
And then we took this advice from the North Korean government, who told us we should probably get these super cool haircuts.
But as super cool as these haircuts were, their ability to boost cash flow on a regular basis wasn't quite as robust as the Supreme Leader had led us to believe.
He is known for his style, but I can see how it doesn't fit you guys. So what did you do next?
Well, we reverted our sights back to the more practical advice of upskilling and retraining.
Okay, so you found a new career path.
Absolutely. We have spent the last 18 months just upskilling and retraining.
Oh, it's fantastic you were able to find work in the current climate. So what have you been doing?
As we said, just upskilling and retraining.
But you've been upskilling and retraining in what specifically?
Nothing but upskilling and retraining. We've become the two most qualified people in the world.
We got a thirst for knowledge that we simply will not apologise for.
I mean, look at all these qualifications. Teaching,
Patisserie,
Spanish,
farming.
teaching patisserie to Spanish farmers. It's all there.
But the problem was, we were better at acquiring these qualifications than using them.
So you haven't actually worked for money?
Whoa!
Well, to be fair, Lakshmi, there wasn't a whole lot of job vacancies going around during the pandemic, you know what I mean? Especially not for teaching patisserie to Spanish farmers.
So all you've done is study.
Yeah! But we would use the more professional terminology.
Have you heard the terms upskilling and retraining?
See, why we didn't, have any trouble acquiring these qualifications, we had a few hiccups applying them with paid work.
The only career we could find that was appropriate for people with our now very broad set of skills and training was becoming careers advisors.
And frankly, career advising people on how best they should upskill and retrain seemed like the only viable way for us to pay off our now extremely large debts.
Debts, might I add, that we did not have prior to all this upskilling and retraining.
So
Yeah.
now you're working as careers advisors?
That's right.
But confirming both of you have never actually had a career.
The brilliant part about our new business model is that we've actually started our own school.
Our own dedicated facility of upskilling and retraining.
Oh, so people can upskill and retrain in their chosen field.
Exactly. Provided that their chosen field is career advisorship.
May we present to you Sweeney and Ethan's Career Advising Academy for people who specifically want to become career advisors.
Our motto is, if you can dream it, you can do it. Provided that the dreams you're having are very specific, lucid ones about the profession of career advising.
So what sort of clientele are you getting?
Oh, we've career advised everyone on career advising. Old, young, local, international, human, dog.
Well, sounds like you've got a pretty broad demographic.
Sorry, did you say dog?
Here's Bella the Chow Chow on her graduation day. She is the best career advisor in the dog park.
Oh, what a good girl. Oh, this sounds like a very sustainable career option for both of you.
You may think so, but actually we've been career advising so many people on how best they should upskill and retrain, the Melbourne career advising industry has become extremely crowded.
Something we never anticipated happening was being so good at our jobs, career advising and training so many clients that we've been made redundant.
Oh no, so the dream of becoming full-time career advisors is now over.
More or less, yeah.
So did you go looking for more work?
Well, we had to pull some strings and call in some favours, but we've managed to get an appointment with Melbourne's best careers advisor.
Bella the Chow Chow.
Small industry. What did she say to you?
She wants us to become
comedians.
Oh, we love that we have comedians living next door. Ethan and Sweeney, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for watching the week.